Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Carbon Engine talk that we're going to give. You may have heard about the Carbon Engine, you may not have heard about it. We're going to explain what it is and tell you about its origins, the team members that are on this panel as well, and talk about the technology we have in the future, and we'll take questions as well. So we'll keep the slide pretty condensed, so we'll allow for people to ask questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So I guess we'll introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Dimitris Giannakis. I'm the lead Carbon Engine developer at Limited Run. You may also know me on YouTube as Modern Vintage Gamer as well. Joe, do you want to?
My name is Joe Modzeleski. I'm the development director at Limited Run Games. I kind of oversee all of our internal development efforts, porting, internal game development, and the Carbon Engine.
I'm Audi Sorlie. I come from Digital Foundry and work as the lead producer on kind of the Carbon Engine. And I make sure that the things he says should happen actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Jeremy Parish. I'm not actually involved with the Carbon Engine, but sometimes I walk into our boss's office and say, hey, I thought of an obscure game we should reissue. So that counts for something, right?
Yeah.
That's you.
It's me.
Thanks, man.
It's also you.
So what is the Carbon Engine? I stole this from the Limited Run Games website. I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm just going to tell you what I think it is in my own words. But basically, it is a tool that we use to basically bring back old retro games. Whether that is something that is obscure and is no longer around, or it's very expensive to purchase and demands a very high cost on the second-hand market, or maybe a game that was never released in the United States that has a translation that we want to bring to the US for the first time. And essentially, we allow to do that with modern tools that we have, as well as we support all modern consoles as well. And it's really just a way for us to bring back all old retro games. You guys have anything to add to that at all?
That's what it is.
So that was a job description?
So the goal of Carbon is, again, just to breathe new life into releases that are rare, sought after, no longer available, and just make it accessible to consumers, preservationists as well as developers. And it says here, and I really like this, what we say here, we seek to create a perfect, accurate representation for the player, creating a true carbon copy, and I really like that line. And it's really, again, just to offer a retro experience to a new audience.
I think an additional thing about what the goal is for Carbon, and this is less noticeable or transparent or whatever to consumers, but for developers, there's a lot of developers and publishers that have access to this huge back catalog of software that they have no idea what to do with. They don't have the technology to do anything with it. And so, a big goal for us was to work with a ton of our partners that we have around the world and give them a kind of low-risk pipeline to utilize that old content and re-deliver it to people in a way that they weren't able to before there was, people like us doing this stuff.
Also, I'd say that when it comes to preserving history in video games, it's also an opportunity for us to make history with some of these games. So when we do put out a game, for example, that never came out outside of Japan, we can kind of make this full circle come around 30 years later, like with Rendering Range R2 recently. So it's not just about preserving history, it's also making history.
Yeah.
You can put that on a t-shirt, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, and speaking as someone kind of on the fringes of this project, for me it's really exciting that there is a company that is dedicated to just doing this. I mean, that's not all that Limited Run does, but internally it's a really huge focus for us, and that's something that's really been lacking in the industry. I'm someone who came here from the games press, and for 25 years, I've been, kind of a rabble raiser, saying, why aren't, people making old games available? Companies have no appreciation for the value of old games, they're just always looking forward. And what I've discovered in moving over to the publication, publishing, and development side of things is that it's actually complicated to keep old games in circulation because there's all kinds of rights that have been spread out. Just because a company published a game doesn't mean they own it. Maybe the developer owns some of it. Maybe the soundtrack belongs to the composer. Maybe there's a license attached to it. And even if companies had an easy pipeline for just getting things out there into emulation, like on Virtual Console or something like that, that doesn't always mean it's easy to make that happen. And one of the things we do in addition, kind of as a side feature of Carbon, is a lot of the logistical work and just kind of greasing the wheels and shaking the hands and everything to make some of these things possible.
Yeah, well said. So the engines that we support currently is Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, NES, Super NES, Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, Master System, Game Gear. Did I miss anything? I think I got all of them.
Sounds like everything to me.
And we're currently working on PlayStation 1 and other things that we can't really say. PlayStation 1 was actually, I think Josh tweeted about PlayStation 1, so...
Yeah, so like nothing should have been said at all, but
Yeah.
like I guess because that tweet is out there, I can say that I have been playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on Switch.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Awesome.
just to do it.
Okay.
That doesn't mean we're doing anything, it just means that I can load Tony Hawk on my Switch and play it.
So we are continuing to evolve the engine and support more things as we get the opportunities to do so, whether that is from a partner that wants to work with us or whether it's something that we feel like we want to do ourselves. So Joe and Jeremy, maybe tell us a little bit about the Carbon engine as far as the origin story. How did it kind of come to be, and what was the idea and the genesis of it?
So before Carbon started, I was doing all the internal development stuff at Limited Run. So I was just doing ports and stuff like that. We don't really have to get into all that, but that's kind of what I was doing my day-to-day, helping developers, helping them out with kind of just like day-to-day Limited Run stuff, and doing ports. And what's really cool about Limited Run is that they kind of provide people there a lot of resources to, push towards things that you're really excited about. That could be, some new venture for us to explore. And I'm really, really passionate about game preservation and retro games, and I really want to get into doing some emulation stuff on modern platforms. We had a couple of partners, primarily Way Forward was a good partner of ours that has some old games that we thought, hey, maybe we can help them bring these back out. And interestingly enough, this guy here, I was a fan of his channel, and I thought this was kind of funny. You put out a video where you ported Diablo.
Yes.
Over to the Switch, and this was without access to source or
Illegally,
anything like
yeah.
But it was without. It was on a homebrew Switch. I had learned that he had not done any professional game dev work ever. It was all just homebrew stuff, and you didn't have access to any source of any kind. But you got Diablo running on Switch, and I was like, you know what, like. This guy clearly likes the same stuff as me. He's passionate about the same stuff, and he's got the skills that I'm missing to do this.
Yeah.
So I reached out to you and was just like, hey. Would you be interested in something like this? We kind of talked about it for a little while, and then I just went to Josh and was like, hey, I got a guy, we've got a game we can do. It was Shantae, we got from Way Forward, and this is how long I think it's going to take to do. And he was just like, yeah, this is cool, let's do it.
Yeah.
And it just kept kind of growing from there. You weren't around for this.
No, I mean, that conversation probably happened, during the pandemic.
No, we started doing
I think
this.
it was before.
This was
Okay.
pre-pandemic.
So it was before
yeah.
I was hired.
Yeah.
I was hired, and then the pandemic began. I don't know that those are interrelated, but maybe.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to see all of that. But I do know that I was brought on to the company around the time that we really started to get serious about this, just because I think Josh and Douglas know that that's always been something that's very important for me, and that if nothing else, I can provide some sanity checks or just ideas about how things should work in terms of more on the publishing side than the technical side. So I think that was in the back of their mind when they said, "Hey, come work here."
But the Carbon stuff was extremely low key for a while at Limited Run. While we were working on Shantae, we just kind of sat there, were able to work on it, and nobody really paid us any mind. It was just kind of like, yeah, there's this thing they're working on. We don't really know what it's going to turn into. And then Shantae did really, really well for us, and we started exploring like what we want to do next, what more potential there was to what we were doing, and it really just absolutely exploded.
Yeah. And I guess with that, some milestones. So we started in November of 2019, as mentioned, and originally we were just targeting the Nintendo Switch because, again, that was kind of the I guess what we had in line with Way Forward at the time, and we were working on Shantae, and we ended up shipping that on April 2021. Which, I mean, if you look at that time difference, there's a lot of time that's gone between November 2019 and April 2021. But if you think about it, we also had to establish the Carbon engine. We started building it from scratch. We didn't have anything, so it was really something that we were developing the engine as well as trying to get the game up and running as well.
Well, so what's interesting about that, before we move on to the next part, is, we didn't really touch on this, but the way Carbon kind of works, and I know this is like a really simplified way of explaining it, but it's like a development engine that you can slot emulators into,
Right.
essentially,
Right.
And and that's not how it started originally,
Yeah.
but this first version of Carbon did not use an emulator that we ported into it. You wrote the Game Boy emulator from scratch.
Yep.
And that kind of made it take as long as it did.
Right. So yeah, we shipped April 2021, and since then we shipped River City Girls 0 on February the 14th of this year on Valentine's Day for the Switch. So initially we just had Carbon kind of running on the Switch, but behind the scenes we were working on getting the engine up and running on other hardware platforms, and we ended up getting Carbon up and running on Xbox One X, Xbox One, Series S, Series X, PS4, PS5, and Steam in around June of 2022. Since then we've shipped River City Girls 0 on PS4, PS5, Xbox, Steam in September. Shantae PS4 and 5 is coming out soon. I don't know exactly when, but we're working on that at the moment. And the future is, there's a lot of things that are going on we can't really talk about, but we have multiple titles signed and are in active development right now. You'll start to see those coming out next year, and we're going to continue working to bring new things to Carbon, new engines along the way as well. Guys, did you have anything to add about the future, and as far as the publishers that we sign and the companies that we partner with and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's exciting, especially for me, because I'm originally from Europe, and a lot of the systems and titles that I grew up with, I don't think got widespread releases here and overseas other places. And so for some of these titles in the future for Carbon, you'll see some rather obscure games, I think, in rather obscure systems. But I think it's going to be really fun to see those games get a new life and a new chance here that it never had before.
Good.
Yeah, something that really excites me about Carbon and just this whole process is that it really builds on itself. And the more that we're able to do, the more doors that opens for us to do even more things. I mentioned publishers and the difficulties they have getting things published and bringing old games back into circulation. But I think as games are released and they see the value of their back catalogs, I know this has already kind of happened to a certain degree, not necessarily with Carbon, but just with limited run releases. Old games being put back into circulation has made publishers say, whoa, there's actually like legitimate business and money to be made here. And so that kind of opens the floodgates for other things to come along. And also in terms of the tech, the more systems we get into the emulator shell, or that whole engine, the more that kind of opens up. Like for me personally, one of my grails that I'd really like to see is the MSX home computer, which never got released in the US in any significant numbers, and doesn't necessarily have a lot of value here for sinking tons of resources into. But because we have Master System emulation, that's built on SG-1000, Sega SG-1000 emulation, and SG-1000 is basically the same thing as MSX minus some RAM. And that also opens the door for ColecoVision, which is pretty much the same hardware architecture. So I don't know if these things are happening, but they could much more easily happen than if we just had to start from scratch. So I just, for me personally, as someone who is very, very adamant about keeping old games circulated and having access to classics and keeping them viable in the public eye, I can't wait to see where all of this goes.
Well, and speaking about, what's viable and stuff like that, I think something that a lot of people don't know and don't talk about when they're talking about the logistics of bringing back old games is there's financial logistics as well. There's financial investment that can stop a lot of retro games from coming back, because the IP holders of these old games, they don't, they look at the investment it's going to take to get that game back, right? If they have to start from scratch, they have to do their own emulation, hire their own team, get the stuff together. There's too much of an upfront development cost to get something this running in a way that's acceptable, and that investment is going to stop them from doing it. Whereas what we can offer with Carbon and what we offer to our partners is something where we have already made that investment ourselves. So we've significantly reduced the financial risk of bringing back a lot of these games, And I think that's something that people don't really think about either, that there's a huge financial investment involved with doing this kind of work, and we've already got years of investment into it, and that just accelerates things for people.
Yeah, well said. And that's really about it. So we're not going to sit here and talk about carbon any more than we need to. We really want to kind of turn it to you guys, and if you have any questions about any aspect of the carbon engine or anything else, just please let us know. You may want to jump up here and ask a question there.
So how much excitement have you seen from developers, as the carbon engine matures, more and more games are going to get published, more and more games are going to get ported. Is that also consequently generating a lot of excitement? How much do you guys have to seek partners versus partners seeking you out right now?
It's completely flipped as far as like how I've perceived it internally. Whereas originally we were looking for opportunities for games that we could use to demonstrate carbon. Now I would say, like at our last GDC, it was a huge kind of tentpole thing that we talked about. And tons of developers since GDC have been coming to us to, look at us as an option to release these games, as opposed to us trying to seek them out. I think we kind of demonstrated with our first couple of games that, what we can do and how it can benefit their old libraries, and a lot of developers seem to be responding super well to it.
One thing that might be interesting also, just because I conduct a lot of my meetings in Japanese, and one thing that's always interesting to me, even when I'm not talking about the Carbon project, is that a lot of these companies kind of end the meeting like, by the way, can we talk about carbon? So even when we talk to our Japanese developers now and partners, carbon actually comes up a lot, which probably will excite you.
So emulators seem to have lots of different priorities. There's ease of porting, breadth of systems, accuracy. What are the priorities for the Carbon project?
I think from my perspective, it's about accuracy. I think, we kind of mentioned that carbon copy, what we talk about. Like for me, I'm big on accuracy. I want to make sure that, if we're going to bring a game back, it's going to be exactly the way that you remember it. But having said that, and I know you guys have your own things as well, but having said that, we also want to enhance the engine and provide quality of life features for a modern audience as well, right? So whether that's save states, rewind funk features, whatever that is, we try to do that as well. So.
I was gonna say, for me, accuracy is almost the most important thing, right? It's right at the top for me. I just would word it a little differently. I'd say it's preserving the integrity of the game. So for me, while accuracy is super important, it's what we constantly strive for. There are certain things that I kind of think edge out a little bit more. If there's anything we can do to prioritize, minimal input latency over absolute accuracy, that's something that I would try and kind of push for. Or any sort of adjustments to the game that might, like you said, quality of life things that might, preserve the integrity of the game but make it more accessible. As long as the general feel and integrity of that game is preserved in a way that is accessible today and plays really, really well on the hardware we're looking at, that's what I care about the most. And if we have to ever compromise any amount of absolute accuracy to the original game, that it would only be for the sake of making it play better.
This is probably something that Audi and I have in common, but having come from journalistic backgrounds, to me, the thing that is really, really cool about Carbon personally is the opportunity it opens up to be able to tell the stories of these games. That's what really drives me, is getting the stories of the developers and the development of the games themselves and the history of them out. And I do a lot of that just kind of on my own with podcasts and videos and so forth. But there will be more and more opportunities to make that a part of the package for the game. So we've been able to do that, with some of our releases, like the Neo Geo Pocket Color Collection, the Monkey Island Collection. I put together huge books for both of those, and that was really, really fun and exciting. But just being able to do more and more of that, and hopefully getting developers and publishers on board to kind of go through the painstaking process of vetting a lot of text and coverage like that. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
It's really important to stress that, because if you do emulation of any kind of compilations, by just giving you a list of games, we don't really target everyone, but giving context to what these games were then and now, I think can make all of you kind of potential customers and discover either to rediscover a game you knew about, didn't know this context, or completely discover a brand new world, right? So context is kind of king with Carbon.
Yeah, Digital Eclipse has been doing great work with the Turtles collection, and what did they just publish? I totally just blanked on the
Atari 50.
Atari 50.
Yeah, Atari 50.
Yeah.
My colleague Chris Kohler's over there kind of driving that, and he's doing awesome work, and I, want us to be able to do that sort of thing, but maybe not around necessarily tentpole releases that everyone loves, like Turtles, but maybe something like, I don't know, Spanky's Quest or Bubsy.
No.
That are more often released, things that have a smaller fan base. Their stories, there aren't as many people clamoring to tell those stories, but that doesn't mean those stories aren't important, and I want that to be part of this whole, kind of cosmos that we're creating.
I think what helps a lot too is that we have a group of people working on Carbon that all care intensely about what they're doing, but through a diverse lens. Everybody working on Carbon really cares about a particular thing, even though we all kind of want the best package we can get. We all care about a different thing that is as equally as important, and I think that helps us put together things that are hopefully going to be really special.
Sorry for making you stand and wait.
No, you're fine. Don't worry about it. First off, MPG, I love your content, bro. Keep coming out good work. I love what you did on Quake.
Thank you.
On PS4.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Jeremy, he
Anyways.
doesn't love us.
Listen.
You guys are tough with them.
I came here for a reason. It wasn't just that. Well, maybe it was just that. But besides the point. On the context of emulation and comparing the engine to something like, let's say, Christian Whitehead's retro engine, where he rebuilt certain games from the ground up and utilizing other peripherals from different consoles, such as the Famicom disk drive to Sega, CD, 32X, etc. How do your process go from going from just a base console to exploring these different peripherals and how games work and coincide with it? I want to know.
It's a good question. I think ultimately, if we decide to use a peripheral in that fashion, it's because there's a reason for us to do so. So a good example would be something like Game Boy Link. That's something that we have implemented. It's something that may or may not come up in future projects, but it's really, at the end of the day, I think from my perspective, it's if there's a reason to incorporate a peripheral into the emulation stack itself, then we'll do so.
Why would you tell them about Game Boy Link?
Because it's awesome.
He's wrong.
Did you guys know there was a Bubsy game on Game Boy?
Stop it.
Bubsy 2.
Yeah, Bubsy 2 was on Game Boy, and it was somehow even worse.
It's pretty bad.
Two questions, actually. I have two questions, actually.
Go ahead.
First one, do you ever take requests?
Yes.
Yeah, constantly.
What do you
Doesn't
got?
mean we'll do
What do
it.
you got?
Snatcher.
Ooh,
Listen.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Hopefully.
I assure you're not the first person to ask us.
Yeah.
I pretty much gathered that. But, as long as Konami doesn't ignore me here.
I'll give you Konami's
bit of a
email,
sore
so we can talk
spot.
What was your other question?
My other question is, you've talked about how you have to kind of follow a trail to the rights to get a game off the ground. Have you had any heartbreaking dead ends?
Yes, and we can't talk about them.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
And
no.
they're very heartbreaking.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't want to. I'm afraid of hearing what they would be. What about overjoyous successes?
Yes, we have had
Yeah, I
that
think
too.
so. Yeah, for me, bringing Shantae back was a highlight. Getting that game back. I'm a game collector, and I see what the original cartridge was worth on eBay.
It's too
And
much.
yeah, and so being able to bring that back, and not only for the Switch, but also getting the physical as well. The reprints of the physical was awesome too. So that's probably mine at this time.
I don't know about you guys do it, but when I found out I was going to work on Bill and Ted on NES, I cried for days. I'll leave that ambiguous whether or not that was good or bad.
Yeah, I will say that there is a game that we have in the works that's pretty off in the weeds, but I can't believe that we're able to do that, and I'm very excited.
What, something like Just Taken Necromancer or something?
I cannot say what it is, just that it's going to be awesome, and it's, like a personal favorite of mine.
Okay.
You're talking about Yobro and TurboGrafx, right? What's that? Yobro?
GG and
Thank you.
Toilet Kits.
Toilet kits?
Yeah, that's really good.
All right, so I guess I have a little bit more of a technical question. How much of the Carbon engine is built on open source software? Do you guys hand write each emulator, or do you build on top of community available software for some of it?
Good question. So we handwrite some of it. Some of it is ours. We do also license open source emulation as well. I couldn't tell you the exact kind of breakdown of that, but we definitely have licensed emulator stuff in the past as well. Anything to add?
No, I guess the only thing I would add, and it's just kind of vague, but like for the stuff that we do license, we make sure that not only do we license stuff and utilize it, but we reach out to the people that have worked on it, written it, and make sure that we have kind of their blessing,
Yes.
and that they are aware of what we're going to do with it, and we make sure we're involved with who is working on what we're licensing, and we make sure everything is done in the right way, that the right people are taken care of.
The great thing about that also is that they're often very excited about being able to kind of officially provide emulation for these products. So it's pretty fun.
And I guess I have one more question that probably answers itself. Do you have any intention of open sourcing any part of your stack? I assume it's going to be proprietary for the most part.
Not now, but I would say, I don't know what the future holds. We might.
Okay.
I mean, it could be something that we could open up at some point, but at the moment, I would say no.
Yeah, it's the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Hey guys, so first, thanks for all the cool projects you're putting out, even if my bank account doesn't thank you. So
Mine does.
I'm sure it does. I cry when I look at my unfulfilled list. So anyway, jokes aside, this is mostly for Demetrius, but others can answer too. What was sort of the most surprising thing of moving from kind of looking at emulation and homebrew as a hobby space and kind of bringing it to a more commercially viable thing for bigger companies, whether it's specifically Carbon or just in the space of some of the homebrew releases you've done. And then the second part was I noticed Neo Geo Pocket Color wasn't on that list. Was that not part of Carbon, despite the fact that Jeremy wrote a book about all those games?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, that book was based on the Neo Geo Pocket Color collection that SNK published.
Oh, okay.
So it's their own thing.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to answer the first question, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, as you can probably imagine, but when you build a product for a commercial release, then you're effectively tailoring the entire experience around the game. So rather than building, we'll just use Game Boy as an example, rather than building a Game Boy emulator that supports every single ROM, we're not too worried about testing every single ROM other than just general accuracy and performance.
So we don't care about obscure mappers and stuff like that?
Yeah, exactly. So we basically tailor the experience for the game, and as new things come up, we add things obviously as we need to. But I find there's a big difference between hobbyist emulation and commercial releases, because there is so much work that I'm not saying there isn't work in hobbyist emulation. There's obviously tons of work, and a lot of them have pioneered and led the way in that field. But when you're trying to get a game out, you're worrying about the publisher, you're worrying about certification, you're worrying about do the trophies pop when you beat a certain boss, and there's all sorts of things that you don't even think, that doesn't even come into the conversation when you talk about traditional emulation. So it's really, at the end of the day, you're making another game, you're shipping another game, and trying to get it out the door, and that's really, that's the way I kind of see it. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
No, you're talking about how we just kind of tailor this to one game per release, and that's true, but it just reminds me of just a funny moment. I really love making Demetrius mad when I'm kind of like stress testing a lot of our emulators, and just doing weird things and finding weird bugs and sending them back to him. But I remember when we were first doing Game Boy, that even though we were just kind of targeting Shantae, I was still testing a lot of games just to see, like, because I knew, okay, if we increase our accuracy across the board, it's just going to make Shantae more accurate too. And do you remember when I threw Killer Instinct at it, and it, I don't remember what the problem was, but all the characters' heads were like 5 feet above their body. Like Shantae ran great, but Killer Instinct didn't, like, it was just like completely busted.
Right.
And yeah, I just like, threw that at you, and it completely distracted you. You're like, well, I have to fix this.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Now, mine is kind of a two-parter question. You can choose to pick either or answer both.
Okay.
Can we choose to answer neither?
No.
Okay.
If you had to pick a dream game to bring out to the public eye again, or a console to have Carbon Engine use that is not currently supported, what is your game or console?
Carbon
Dream
Chicken.
game, I don't know.
Willow for the NES.
What do you got?
Yeah, Willow for NES.
Man, I'll let Jeremy answer first.
I mean, for me, I already said MSX as a platform. That's just, there's so much cool stuff there that we've never seen in the US and that people, I think, would really enjoy.
I want DOS. I want more DOS stuff because, like, you know.
Some Commander Keen.
Yeah. Well, no, it's specifically because like we get to do, you know, we get these opportunities sometimes to look at potentially doing collections, right? Like some other developers do. And I think what's super common when you see these collections come out is it's always the console versions of games. And you very rarely see like these really bizarre DOS versions that most people didn't. Well, most people, you know, in the modern consoles like space, they never played these.
So
I
what you're saying
want
is like the Ninja Turtles collection didn't include the DOS Ninja Turtles that can actually debut.
Yeah, I want it. I want DOS. I want DOS Mega Man and DOS Mega Man 3.
Yeah.
We need to complete the trilogy. We need to go back and make a DOS Mega Man 2.
This is why you can't ask questions to someone who's suffering from irony poisoning.
I gotta say that, like, things that I really want to support. So I have a long history of working with preservation in Japan for the PC-98 computer system, and know a lot of the developers that worked on games for that platform and helped a lot. It was like a place called the Tokugawa forums back in the day on the internet, where people like put games up and kind of preserve them. And I might have had a secret alias there, but I worked a long time on that, and I would love to bring, you know, those games out again and give context to those games and kind of bring these out. And then also Commodore 64 and Amiga, because there's a lot of these compilations that come out. And we mentioned Turtles right now, right? And it's like, there's microcomputer versions, like the Commodore 64 versions are actually good. I grew up with them. But I never see them mentioned, because I don't think in the US those kind of systems, I think you guys were more on like the Atari 2600 stuff. But for us in Europe, in Germany, Norway, it was really big with Commodore 64. So I would love to support those systems.
Did you give a game? You're allowed to say Bubsy
game,
3D now. You're allowed to say it.
I'd say Awesome Possum.
Oh, God.
Cool. Thank you guys.
Yep, thanks.
You're fired.
And my question's changed so many times now because you guys already answered it.
That's okay.
But I wanted to ask, are you guys working with Nintendo to bring back some of their titles?
We're not working with Nintendo on any of their title. I think Nintendo already has kind of a pipeline to do.
Because
and
they
distribute
don't
a lot of
like
theirs.
doing,
Yeah.
they don't like people emulating their stuff, right?
Well, I mean, they say they don't like people emulating this stuff.
They like emulating their
But
own
they
stuff.
have an online service that's all it is. So I mean, you know.
I don't think they like people emulating their stuff without, you know, paying like licenses and,
Right.
you know, just avoiding copyright basically.
Money.
Exactly. If it involves money, they're like, yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yep.
I'll answer.
I actually have two questions. First one, arcade machines which have never received a home port, how viable would they be? Or is that out of scope?
What was it? Sorry.
Arcade machines that have
arcade
not
machines.
seen home ports.
Oh, that's something
It's a constant conversation.
Yeah.
It's not out of the question at all.
Yeah, not out of the question at all. Yeah, we're all arcade fans, so we have a certain amount of influence
If
as
there's a
to
dream
what we do.
arcade machine you wanted to bring to home consoles for the first time.
For the first time.
Ooh.
Oh man, you gotta go first. I gotta think about this one.
Well,
I know what I want, but it's been. I'm cheating. I'm cheating a little bit. I know what I want.
What is it?
It has been on home consoles, but never arcade perfect. I want NBA Jam.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
I want the outboxes.
Outboxes, yeah.
All right, I
I
got
like
three
Alto.
questions. So first one, what's your limit for like console generation or like computer? Like, what's your limit?
Probably where we're exploring right now, right?
I'd say 32-bit
Yeah.
systems
All right.
in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for the second question, my mind blanked. But what is the? Do you think you'll do more computer stuff, like more home computer?
Yes.
or-
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because consoles, it's kind of not as easy to get licenses,
Right.
and a lot of computer territory is unexplored except for like niche hobbyists that other people like don't know of. And thirdly, how do you think it's people don't really understand how hard it is to get officially licensed like emulation and like IPs out. They just think, oh, you can slap a ROM onto a console and
Right.
bundle an open source emulator and call it a day.
Yeah, sure doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you
doesn't.
think how do you think you guys will be able to like make people understand that over the years?
Ooh.
I think that's a really loaded question. Because I think
Sorry.
like well, no, it's not a bad thing. It's just like there's that'd be a question that would take a long time to break down. I think because that's game development in general. It's not just emulation.
Yeah, and I think honestly, it's a little out of scope of what we do. And what I'm saying by that is, someone like Frank Cifaldi from the Video Game History Foundation could explain that a lot better than someone like me. I just, just like writing code and doing cool things. But there's
PSP
definitely
emulators.
what's that?
And making good PSP emulators.
But yeah, it's a very interesting question.
I think in general there's just a transparency problem in game development, like between the game development community and the game fan community. Just in general, there's a transparency problem regarding the complications of game development. And that's not exclusive to emulation. That's across the whole board.
Yeah, I think you answered pretty well.
All right, thank you.
Just for you, I've had the honor of working with some of the people that actually contributed to Bubsy 3D. Some of those engineers.
Oh, wow.
Ever wanna talk to them? I can
Do you want to come to my hotel room?
Actually, that last question really leads perfectly into what I was going to talk about because Bubsy 3D, great game, right, everyone? Great.
Do you see how gray my beard is?
Yeah.
I'm 34 years old. This is because of Bubsy 3D.
When you talk to those developers, and I get to talk to them, you get to see their context.
Yeah.
Like, guys, what you're talking about. And Demetrius, when you did your video about like Cheap Ride Outfit 2, I had to get a copy after that because as a developer, I see the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're talking about is all those complications and how you surface that. So what is Limited Run all of you thinking in terms of creating that context so that people can see? Because to me, I collect things when I find there's more value when I hear their story.
Yeah.
This is not as related to Carbon. I'd like you to talk about this. It's not directly related to Carbon, but it's a good answer to his question. And we've announced this already. We are working on a rebuild remaster of Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, and
It's not Carbon, by the way.
it's not Carbon, but I think
it has the same team members.
I think it has the same team members, and I think our approach to doing that is based entirely around less of what Plumbers is, and more how do we create a really interesting or appealing story about the context of that game.
Like you just said, every game has a story. How it was made, what it meant to those who made it, and how it was perceived back then and now. And for example, Plumbers, my first day at this job, the first thing that my boss told me was yeah, you're a producer on Plumbers, just make it work. Make people want it. I was all right, so I basically should quit right now. But the one thing that I decided right there and then is well, what people I think want when they think about plumbers is to turn off the machine, but
So how do you make them not do that?
Yeah, so how do you make them not do that? And I think the way to not do that is to just give context to why does this game exist? How did it come to exist? Even though it is the worst game ever made, I'm gonna make the best version of it and tell the story the best way I can. So we did find the original people, interviewed them, made a documentary. We made kind of like an interactive museum. So, you know, the way I kind of want you all to feel when it comes to these carbon games and the way I want you to have context is like that magical Christmas morning when you unwrapped your CDI encyclopedias. And there's like that feeling, you know, that we all had when we grew up. That's how I want you to feel. That's how I give you context.
Awesome.
Thanks.
So I think it's been touched upon a little bit about Nintendo's famous litigious nature. I guess I always assumed that emulators, if they're hobbyist emulators, they're made without the blessing of the companies that are involved. I'm curious about how you get, say, a Game Boy emulator as a commercial product. Is Nintendo involved at all?
No. I mean, so again, the way that we offer our releases, I mean, you know it's emulation because we're telling you it's emulation, but if you just plug the game in and you didn't really know what it was, you'd almost feel like you're just playing a regular game. So I guess what I'm saying is we don't really, I mean, we talk about the carbon engine because that's what we do, and you know, that's our job, but when we just offer a release to just the average person, they don't know it's running an emulator. Some people do, but we try to present it in such a way where it's just transparent.
Also, like Nintendo, you know, like emulation is an interpretation of the hardware, but it's not based on the actual specifications and documentation, the official ones. So Nintendo can't actually come and say like, hey, you know, we can't do that because it's our interpretation of it.
It's not like we're, you know, sneaking around behind Nintendo's back. We're publishing these games on Nintendo Switch, which means they need to go through the approvals process. They need to be, you know, approved by Nintendo's gatekeepers. So obviously, if there were a problem, if they didn't approve of the logistics of what we're doing and the legalities, that would shut that down right there. But that's not the case. So, you know, it really kind of depends on your approach to how you build your emulator and also how you present the games within the emulators. And you know, we're not using like the Nintendo seal of quality on our packaging and things like that. We have to kind of strip off that branding. And that's really, I think, you know, where the big concern is that, you know, we're not misrepresenting ourselves as, you know, like an official Nintendo product necessarily, except, you know, when it is through Switch. But we're doing it in a way that we can also publish on PS4. And that involves a lot of behind the scenes work and a lot of kind of carefully stepping over and kind of figuring out what's actually going to be okay. So, you know, again, that's part of what I was talking about earlier, where there's a lot of you know, wires to slip through and hoops to jump over to kind of make these things work for publishers and developers, and that's something that we have to take care of.
I think approval, touching on what you're talking about approval and stuff like that, I think what's a bigger problem that has been faced with emulation commercially, and something that we kind of benefit from walking in the footsteps of kind of giants before us working in commercialized emulation, is that many companies in the industry have kind of worked very hard to make emulation a dirty word for a very long time. And they made it very difficult for people to commercialize emulation out of some fear that what they were doing was wrong in some way or was going to step on the toes of some other partners of theirs. And that it was just like, that it was wrong in some capacity. And we've had a lot of developers before us kind of ease those concerns and do a lot of work to make, to kind of fix the negative stigma around emulation. I'm very tired. So that's really more of what I think was the problem for a very long time, and thankfully that's not something we've had to deal with because a lot of people kind of paved the road for us.
We have about 1 minute left, so let's get through the last 3 questions real quick, and we'll finish up.
Hopefully this won't take very long. So this is more of a technical question regarding the accuracy of emulation. So was there a game that used a quirk of the hardware that was vital to the accuracy that you thought was pretty interesting?
Yeah, there's a couple that we've been kind of working on that I can't really talk about that have had kind of weird emulation quirks that have kind of caught us out a few times. So there's definitely some things like that. But Unfortunately, I can't really say. But,
Thank you.
20 seconds.
Yeah, I know. All right, so someone mentioned about, different PCs from back in the era. That reminded me, how do y'all feel about using the Carbon engine to emulate certain software, say Amiga trackers, for example?
Oh, I'd love
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please do, because
Yeah.
I could use that.
Yeah, we're big Amiga fans here.
Yeah.
Love it.
Great.
1 second. Okay. Time's up.
You know what you should ask him though? This man has never had Taco Bell.
I used to work at Taco Bell.
Oh!
All right, we're out of time real quick.
But what I was going to ask is similar to the nature of talking about like Nintendo specifically, but in general, do you think that
similar.
Do you think that other publishers that have had a somewhat rocky history with porting or making their older titles available, for example, Sega Atlas or Konami or Nintendo, do you think that something like this would have any effect on how they view looking at their older titles? Obviously, you probably wouldn't work on their titles for them. They probably have people that would do that internally.
Yeah.
But do you think that would have an impact on?
That's all the time we have.
Yeah. I don't know. I got nothing. No, you're good. Well, that's it. Thanks everyone for our comments.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and to the right are the playlist of the Portland Retro 2022 and some other interesting videos. Thank you.